this is one of the things that I don't think people realize. A third of people here in Klamath Falls pay more than 50% of their income in rent. We are one of the highest rent burden communities in the state of Oregon. So we really need to not just have single family houses, we need apartments. We're going to need all kinds.
Welcome to Shaping the Basin. I am here with Iain Vasey with the City of Klamath Falls. Tell us what your job is at the city.
Okay, so I'm the director of development services. So we've got all the stuff that gets built in the city, the engineering, the planning. We work with the economic development folks. We've got the airport. Anything that gets built at some point comes through our group. Some of our people like to tell other folks like that we're the brains behind the outfit, but I'm clearly not.
You are fairly new to the community.
A couple of years, coming on 3 years, yeah.
Okay. And where did you move from?
I was down in Texas. I was down in Corpus Christi, and I was working on like economic development stuff, but project management of very large petrochemical projects, steel plants, things like that. So, this was supposed to be my slow down job. I don't know what happened. So, we just keep plugging away, and it seems like wherever we end up, it's things start to happen, and it's kind of just like more fun when you get to have active development projects and major things and projects that actually have impact on the community. So
Yeah, and we're going to talk about some of those, but
we are.
can we talk about some of
Sure.
the fun things you've done at the city?
You know
That's
what?
why I invited you on.
Here's what you guys need to know. When Heather first called me, she said, talk about the secret stuff that's coming. And I said, no, can't do that.
When's
And
Costco going to be here?
I'll tell you about that one. And then she finally said, just make something up. People watching will never know.
Right.
So,
Right.
that's what she said.
Well, you can believe it from Iain. We are going to talk about that, but you've been in your past. I know because you were part of Leadership Klamath, and we talked a little bit. But in your past, you were part of some really big economic development deals.
Mhm.
Can you tell us like
Okay.
maybe one or two of those?
Okay. 2017, I led and pulled together the largest industrial development project in America, which was a plastics and ethane cracker for Exxon and the Saudis. SABIC, Saudi Arabian Basic Industries Corporation, had briefly met the Saudi Crown Prince, dealt with all of those folks, briefed U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross on those projects. Pulled together a very large $3 billion steel plant, electric arc steel furnace for Steel Dynamics, led that project. Was involved with LNG liquid natural gas facilities with Cheniere. So, I actually, as I was coming out, I looked on the wall, and the Port Authority down there passed a resolution, and it said that you'd been part of and pulling together about $55 billion worth of projects. So, yeah, very fortunate. And before that, I was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, doing large industrial deals, but also some tech deals with like IBM and CF Industries, BP, Exxon, and some other folks like that. And before that, I was in corporate real estate world with the world's biggest industrial developer, Trammell Crow, and then Grubb and Ellis after the mergers. So I was kind of doing site selection work, project management, managing large construction projects, structuring the finances. I've been in the construction business or in and around the construction business for over 30 years. That said, don't ask me to frame wood, and don't ask me to weld anything. Don't ask me to lay any bricks. I'm not really good at that. I do the financial structuring and the development agreements and the zoning cases. Worked a 1 million square foot distribution center deal in Riverside, California for Amazon years and years ago. So, been around, done a few things here and there.
A few small things here.
Yeah. Well, they're not really small things here. Wait till,
Yes.
some of the things we're working on here will have will have a material effect for several generations
And
here in Klamath Falls.
that's the part I want to get to talking. I mean, I
Mhm.
wanted to highlight the experience that you brought with you to
And it's not just
Klamath.
me, by the way. There's a whole team of
Sure.
folks that work together. We pulled a team together that are high performing, knowledgeable, experienced folks, especially the engineers. I've got a few engineers on staff who I would stack up against anybody else, and they're in their experience level and their ability to pull off some of these projects are second to none.
Yeah, so that's what I love that all of this experience that people have
Mhm.
taken from other places and brought here is now going to make a difference in our community. So tell me about some of the things you've done so far that you're really proud of with your team.
The biggest one here, and we're currently working on it, and people are starting to realize the scale of this. Um, Maybe I should back up. I don't think people realize how under threat this community was when the Air Force and Air National Guard started to retire the plans to retire the F-15. Now, if we didn't get a successor aircraft to the F-15, whether it was going to be the F-15EX, which is kind of turned out to be a very smaller thing, or what we were fortunate enough to land as a community was the F-35. Now, the reason for that is imagine if the economic impact, if we lost that huge employer, that huge economic engine, if we didn't have that air base with somewhere around 1,100 to 1,200 people working on that, we didn't have the injection of that revenue from essentially the federal government and all the contractors coming into this community. And here's why it's important. So when they retire the F-15, go to the F-35, you need a whole bunch of new things that go with it, meaning you need new repair and maintenance facilities, you need an academic training center, you need a whole bunch of things. I'm going to talk about that in a second. One of the things we started out with when we were working, and for people who don't know, the city owns the airport as a whole, and the Air National Guard and the U.S. Air Force are kind of our tenants on a long-term thing. So the city's essentially the landlord. And there was a very large, they call it a ramp, but it's like a big 10 football fields, 15 inches thick worth of high spec concrete had been dug up by a prior contractor in the Air Force getting into a dispute. You can argue over what that was, but the contractor is no longer there and it's broken up. And I think the Air Force guys went to the Army Corps of Engineers and said, "Hey, would you help?" And I don't think they had the capacity to do it. So at some point, there was early conversations with, would the city take over the construction management of that process? So we built a construction management team, brought in some engineers, finance people. We restructured some things, and we took that on. And it was a $37 million project. It's open now. I've never seen high spec concrete like this. I mean, it was a tough deal to manage the money, manage the contracting, manage the inspections on this process. But it showed the Air National Guard guys and the Air Force, there's some really good people working there. But it showed them that the city could actually manage a very large project on time, on budget, every piece of money, every dollar that's accounted for. By the way, one of the terrifying things when you're working on federal government projects and using federal money, you better know where every penny's spent and that there's no waste, that there's nobody diverting it, and we're good at that. We've managed that, and we're closing out that project. It's turned over right now to the Air Force. But it let them see that we've got a construction management outfit that did that. So now we're rebuilding and renovating a couple of shelter. They call them shelters, but you and I would know them as a hangar. Hangars, and we're putting in new lightning protection, new lighting, new doors, renovating, taking out lead-based paints, things like that. And we've started this process called Military Construction Cooperative Agreements, MCCAs, where the Air Force doesn't really have capacity, or the Guard doesn't really have capacity to manage the construction and the money and the bidding and all of the things and the inspections. So the city stepped in to do it. Now, at some point, we're going to be spending over the next probably 5 years and managing somewhere about $500 million worth of investment to convert an F-15 base to an F-35 base. People don't think, they think just one plane is like another, but the amount of power that is needed, the amount of data that comes through, we're going to be Congress has just approved $88 million, $80 million for construction, $8 million for design for um, an academic training center. So they're going to have the ability to train pilots that are coming through here. We're going to have a repair and maintenance facility. That's somewhere about 120 something million, I think, is the penciled number that we're working on the designs right now. Monday night, we're going to be going to council to get approval to enter into the MCCA with the Guard for a weapons facility. So where they essentially load and calibrate and do whatever they're going to do on missiles and bombs and however they're going to work through that. So and then we've got sunshades. We're working through design on another shelter hangar type. The difference between a hangar and a shelter apparently is hangars have a door on one side and you pull the aircraft in and out, and shelters have doors on two sides and you pull it through.
Okay.
So that's more than I ever knew. But the point is, it's about $500 million worth of construction over the next 5 years. National defense priority because we support the Pacific Rim warfighting capacity and capabilities. And I think it would be a wonderful thing if we don't just end up with 24 F-35 single squadron kind of thing, but what does the future look like? And these type of projects and the projects that we're going to be running and working through put us in a position to be more competitive. I was meeting with some of the colonels and generals over the last several months, and I think at the time, it was about 16 MCCA projects across the entire country. And it's a way of speeding up the construction and giving assurance and manage it. And we've got 10 of them. So out of the 16 across the Air Force or Air National Guard, we've got 10 of these major projects. And we do it cheaper we do it at a lower percentage than the Army National Guard would charge the Army Corps of Engineers would charge the Air Force. So we do it at a lower rate, but it's in support of keeping the base here, expanding the facility, and really kind of, showing that this community is supportive of the guys in blue that watch the friendly skies.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, a lot of people say, I'm sure you've heard it in our community where people say we don't have an airport because there's no commercial service, right?
You're right. Yeah, and let's talk about it. I get a call for that. One of my other hats that I wear as airport director as well. They lost scheduled service back in about, I think it was 2017. Don't quote me on that one. 2017. And it really, my understanding is that, Klamath Falls Airport was really putting, when a plane had 30 seats available, we'd put 20 to 24 seats all day long, every flight. And that's a good number. It works. The math works for those guys. But when the plane started getting 80 seats, the airlines started doing away with the smaller 30-seat kind of regional planes, getting to the large ones, 80 seats, and we put 24 people on an 80-seat plane. The math doesn't work. So, we would love to have air service. I just the airlines are consolidating the number of places. They're pulling back rather than adding new flights into certain areas. And this is one of the things we've done some feasibility studies, and it's going to be very difficult to be able to get scheduled air service. I could go get it tomorrow, but it'll be $5 million a year thereabouts. It's a big number, and every year to have these minimum revenue guarantees to bring in an airline. And can we afford to do that? Is that a good use of the public dollars, or would it be better to fix the streets and keep parks and things like that? And it's a tough thing to do. So there's things we're starting to look at. I think the airline and aviation industry as a whole, air transportation, it's kind of at one of those. It's at a kind of a pivot point, and it's evolving. And what we're going to start to see is this alternative. You've probably seen the videos and online. It's starting to emerge, but these electric air taxis, it's not here yet, but it's starting to be in major markets. And United Airlines and American and Delta are starting to invest in these things for a short haul. It's like a I don't know, it's like a cross between something of a helicopter and something out of the Avengers. And they're going to be flying to get people from points around, remote points in like New York metro area into LaGuardia. And, it's going to be like an air Uber and quite affordable. So I think I can see, maybe not in this generation, but certainly within the next decade, that the aviation industry will start to see some of these air taxis. And if you go look at, there's a couple of manufacturers, Joby and Archer are two of those companies. And we're part of like the state of Oregon Air Transportation Task Force. And even though it might be hard for us to get traditional air service back and just the money doesn't work, if the economics change, can we get some of these electric, tilt wing or rotary or whatever however you define them, because of different kinds, could we get a hop into, where you can order it on your phone and get a 4 to 10 seat over into Medford or to Portland? And, they're testing these things up in Washington State. They're starting to run service in places like United Arab Emirates and places like that. We're not going to be part of that first generation, but how do we position ourselves to be part of the second or third wave of those, so that a person here in Klamath Falls can, order it up on their phone like an Uber and then connect themselves into either Medford Airport. What happens when the range of these things starts hitting 300 miles, or 350? Think about where, if we had a service that could get you 300 miles, you're into Sacramento, you're into San Francisco, you're into Portland, certainly, maybe not Seattle, but you're not far away from that. I think that's going to be the next play for rural airports that don't necessarily have service. I mean, that said, we've looked at everything. We've thought about everything. Do we buy a plane? Like as a city, I mean, we've looked at the math on this, and the FAA regulations, and one thing that Klamath Falls has is we have pilots everywhere. We have a lot of former Air Force pilots, and I talk to these guys, and they're like, "Hey, if you could do that, I'll fly them for you. We just don't have the plane." And the permits and the FAA licenses and things like that. And then you get into having to do security. You're starting to get to TSA, and you're starting to talk about operating a small airport in the millions of dollars a year, and without any federal support or a kind of funding that comes with it, it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting concept about kind of an air Uber thing. I think.
Yeah, it's not here yet, but if you read up on the space, there's a lot of companies that are, and these companies that make these eVTOL, electric vertical takeoff and landing, or there's variations of that. These aren't companies that are, I mean, it started out as a little startup, but now they've got partnerships for manufacturing with Toyota and Stellantis and people and big companies that know how to put things together on production lines. And when Toyota invests $500 million in, I think it was Archer, when Toyota invested at that, it takes it to a different level of reality. It's not like some guy tinkering in his garage. When Toyota shows up and says, "We're going to build these things for you. We like the technology. We're going to license this," all of a sudden things take on a different tone.
Yeah.
And they're starting to clear some of those FAA training hurdles and the licensing hurdles that are coming. Again, I wouldn't hold my breath, but I think it's the best shot we've got at getting air service back at an affordable rate. Right. Unless somebody wants to step up and give us $5 million a year to burn on it. I can go get Alaska tomorrow for $5 million a year or something like that,
Well, it'll be interesting to see how it plays over the next 10, 15, 20 years.
But I think we're going to see something different, and air services in 10 years time for smaller markets like ours won't look anything like traditional air services looked for the last 50 years.
Right. Well, it's changed a lot in the last 10 to 15 years even. And like you mentioned, the consolidation and things like that. I want to switch gears. This is fascinating, but I do want to talk about housing because that's another issue. Are you doing anything with the housing issues in the community?
Since I've got here, one of the biggest things we've heard and our council members have heard is, what can we do about housing? And it's an expensive thing to build housing, and we don't have enough housing. And it really is an economic limiting factor. if you're an employer that comes in, let's say an employer came in and brought 100 employees with them, where would you house them? You're going to struggle. So, we talk a lot with our economic development colleagues. We talk a lot with our, like, the data tracking folks. We're somewhere now, data can tell you anything, but we think we're about 500 housing units short right now. And then every year, going forwards, we probably need an additional 100 plus houses being brought online. And the other thing we're seeing is the cost per square foot to build houses. So if you're delivering a house, if you're a home builder, you can build houses at $500,000, $600,000, $800,000. It's great, but who can buy those? Those are generally retirees coming out of the Bay Area, or I don't know, 2 doctors at Sky Lakes. I don't know. Once you get the very high end, but where are we going to get housing under $400,000 for working families? Mom and dad working, 2 kids. Where are we going to get housing that a regular working family can live? So we really started looking at this thing, and what are the impediments to this? And so we started looking at, the city charges is required to charge and charges a what's called a system development charge. So when a home builder comes in, they have to pay certain system development charges for things like water, sewer, parks, whatever it is. And we're not allowed to waive them because, dear goodness, the state of Oregon, it loves the regulation, and they like to talk like they are supporting housing and wanting home building, but then they put more and more regulations on the cities. So we figured we're not allowed by law to waive these fees on a home builder. So it adds about $14,000 to the cost of the house, somewhere between $10,000 and $14,000, depending on where the house is built and depending on what type of house. So we created a fund. So we sold some land to Amazon. We negotiated and sold that land down by the airport. That was city land. We sold that land to Amazon for their distribution center, and took that money, put it into the fund. And we took some of the airport, the Air Force fees that were built, for managing the construction. We pulled some of that together. So we pulled $1 million fund together that allows us to waive. Actually, it's technically not waive, it's credit a home builder for if they're building a house. So instead of charging them $14,000, we waive all the system development charges. So it knocks anywhere from $10,000 to $14,000 off the cost of houses if you're building a house or a condo or a townhouse here in the city. That's kind of, so in our older census tract, the older parts of the city will waive all the fees, about $14,000. If you're building on the edge of the city but within city limits, we'll waive $10,000. Now, and I've got the numbers here because we weren't sure whether it was working or not. We had a sense that it was working and triggering things. Plus, we didn't want it to be for waiving fees for $1 million houses. And you don't want to get into price controls. Those are nightmares to take care of. So when we worked it through with the city council in the workshop sessions, we landed on houses that are 1,700 square feet or less, which are by almost definition right now. Once you got 1,700 square feet, you can get a 3-bedroom, 3 or 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house that a family would be perfectly happy to live in. But it's by definition going to be a bit more affordable than a 5,000 square foot house. Sure. And last year we looked at the numbers, and I want to quote from this because this is the latest report. So we had 41 houses built in 29 houses in 2024. We're at 41 already completed housing units this year, and the year's not over, if you noticed. In 2024, we had 47 permitted housing starts. We're at 74 already. We're going to more than double the number of houses being built in the city of Klamath Falls. And one of the things we hear from home builders when they come into us, people come in with plans and they're like, what are we going to do? And then, sometimes we don't hear from them because the margins aren't that profitable. But taking $10,000 off the price of a house for a home builder is the difference between not profitable and not doing it and being profitable to do it. And this is, we weren't sure that this program was we thought it was. We did a lot of research. We did a lot of talking to people going in, and it is working. It's triggering that. It's that injection of stimulus into the housing market. So people are building more houses in Klamath Falls almost as a direct response to this. So, I mean, it really has been a catalyst. Again, we looked at things from a bit more innovative way. We looked at the state regulations, couldn't do it. So we did some things, taking on these Air Force projects for fees, selling the land to Amazon, created a fund. So now we can stimulate the housing market here in the community.
I love that outside of the box thinking. How this
I don't
should
even know
roll
where the box is
in.
anymore.
I like that.
I lost my box a long time ago.
That's awesome.
It's easy to get lost. Don't know which path to take, what to post. In the social media jungle, video is king. Your kids are obsessed, your customers are addicted, we're all hooked, and social media sites prioritize videos. So when you're ready to stand out from the crowd, reach out to 40 Deuce Films. Feeling over everything.
Is there plans? You said you had about $1 million in that. Is there a plan to keep that refreshed and keep money coming into it?
I mean, right now, as it sits, we've got about between $400,000 and $450,000 still in that fund. I anticipate if we keep spending at the rate, accrediting at the rate we're doing right now, probably sometime next summer, we'll have drawn through most of that. Now, we're talking already about how do we, move additional funds around from some of these Air Force projects. And again, we're able to get interest on the Air Force projects to be able to do things like this. And it really, the two are very much tied as well, because, when we've met with the colonels in charge of the wing, one of their questions and one of their comments with the roundtables that, we had with the city council was the missing middle housing. Their employees, and then the school district employees, public service employees, the hospital employees, they can't find, any houses below $500,000. I mean, once you get above $500,000, the market takes care of it. If you can afford a $500,000 house, the market takes care of itself. But when, you're that working level professional making a family making 60 to 150, that's a big range of people. You need to be able, you're looking at houses less than $400,000, and that's what it's supporting. So we're kind of taking a holistic look at where the city's finances are, what we can do to earn fees to then stimulate things that the community is telling us. And again, I haven't figured out how to solve for the 500 houses we're short, but we're going to eat that elephant one bite at a time. And we have it in mind, and we are targeting this to get more homes being built in this community.
That's awesome.
It's an economic limiting factor. Without housing, if you go ask Randy and the guys at Casita, if you bring an employer in, that needs 50 new employees, 50 people move into this community, where are you going to put them for housing? What does it who else does it displace? Are rents going to go up even further? This is one of the things that I don't think people realize. A third of people here in Klamath Falls pay more than 50% of their income in rent. We are one of the highest rent burden communities in the state of Oregon. So we really need to not just have single family houses. We need apartments. We're going to need all kinds of, and if you look at the age of our housing stock, we need some new development, new housing product that people can actually afford and want to live in.
Yeah.
And again, it stops the brain drain. One of the things we hear when I talk to people, and you probably do the same, is, my kids have graduated from college, they're moving out, they couldn't find a place to live, or couldn't find the right job, or, the next comment comes is, I have to go fly somewhere else to go visit my grandchildren, or drive 6 hours to go visit my grandchildren. How do we keep the younger people, stop the brain drain? How do we get the OIT graduates and the high school graduates and the community college graduates? How do we keep them here? We need housing opportunities. We need jobs for them. We need training programs to get them into those jobs program. So it's a holistic approach. This isn't just house. This isn't just about housing. It's about a lot of things.
Right. So we've talked about some of the things you've done, and that's exciting that you've seen some results. Are there things you're getting ready to do that you can announce?
There's a few projects out there. I mean, I can't talk about some of them. I'm not going to talk about the secret stuff because,
Dang it.
we have non-disclosure agreements, but, you'll see actually this week, and I know this will go out later, but Winco's walls are going up vertical. We worked through with that team on that, and we're going to see that open right now. We've been told by about February next year. So February 2026, that should open. That's an exciting little
That is
project.
exciting.
We start to see OIT's doing something. There's a new dorm for about 500 students coming in there. That's well under construction moving forward. Um, on the more affordable housing, we did a grant program and worked with the county and the Klamath Housing Authority, and so there's 88 new, more affordable, kind of income restricted homes being built on Homedale, and there's some for affordable income restricted, but then there's also like 16 veteran homes. I mean, veteran homelessness and veterans are struggling, and we want to do our part to be able to support that. So we've got a grant. We're putting in a new sewer lift station to be able to support all of that new development, which will open up a whole bunch of more development on that campus of Homedale. Let's see what else we've got. The Shiloh Inn is being kind of redeveloped. You're going to start, the old conference facility that's going to come down. There's some retail going to go in there. The hotels are going to be overhauled and rebranded. So that's kind of a nice little thing. I'm trying to think. I'm thinking what I can say in public and what I
Yeah, that's
can't.
all
And I'm
right.
looking at my notes. I'm not going to say that one because there's a couple of projects that we're talking to that probably aren't yet ready for public announcement, but we're working through with their engineering teams and the development teams, their finance teams,
It's
and
exciting.
hopefully we're trying we're actively trying to promote the economic development of this community. And one of the things, a lot of cities, especially in Oregon, are not known as being user friendly, trying to turn permits around, really being proactive and kind of partnering with the development community to do it. There's a lot, I'm not going to say where, but we all know certain parts of the state, they're like, we don't want the growth coming. We're the folks who are going, here's how we can make this happen. Let's figure this out. Let's get a good product and a new things that generate tax revenues for the community, new jobs for the community. That's the approach we take on things.
I love that. I love that you guys are all thinking about that. We're coming to about the end of our time,
Okay.
but I want to know if Iain could have any wave a wand and you could have it here in Klamath, what would it be?
There's a couple things I would love to have happen. We've got a lot of old buildings on Main Street and that are struggling, and the finances, they're upside down in the financing. It'll cost more to renovate than it would cost than's available and would justify in terms of money. It'd be nice if we had the state came and said, look, we'll give you $20 million and do redevelopment funds. They're not going to do that. We would all love Target and Costco. Everybody asked me about Costco, and I'm going to tell you, I reached out. One of my former bosses on the private side is a very senior executive at Costco. I reached out to him and said, do we have a shot? And he said, no. He said, give me a week. I'll run the numbers down. And I said, no, it's not. You don't have the size of the population, income levels. It would cannibalize sales from the other sales across the thing. Sorry, folks. I wish we could. And a lot of people keep talking about it like it's coming. I've got it pretty much from the horse's mouth. Very, very senior exec at the company, who I used to work for. And I don't think it's coming. It'd be great if we get Target or something like that. But before we can run on some of these things, we have to do some things to get us positioned to land those things. Retail follows rooftops and retail follows income. So the things we need are more houses. We need more jobs, primary sector jobs, meaning it brings revenue from outside of the community into the community. We need higher paying jobs. Let's start with that. We need revenue generating jobs that bring revenue from outside versus, for the folks at home, there are different types of jobs. One of them is, like a retail service sector job. It kind of cuts the existing pie into smaller slices. We need things that make our pie bigger. So we need those manufacturing jobs, tech jobs. We need those kind of jobs that pay $100,000+ and bring revenue in from outside. We need those. That's the first step. The second step is we need houses for those folks, and then you'll start to see the retail. By the way, doing incentives for retail deals is a horrible thing to do, because then you're not having that level playing field. We like to have a level playing field that every business operator can the best operator wins, and it forces innovation versus putting your thumb on the scales, go, oh, we like you versus you. So it's, again, would we all love Costco? Would we all love Target? Would we all love a bunch of restaurants? Would we love Chick-fil-A? Would we love In-N-Out? Sure. But what we have to do first is get the jobs and the income and the housing into this community so that those companies will put us on the radar and they will want to come.
Yes. I get asked about Costco all the time, and that's almost exactly what I tell people, that we need more jobs that pay well.
Mm-hmm.
We need to raise
that.
that
And
income.
again, the guy I used to work for and with was, at one point he was the vice president of real estate for Costco, but now he's been promoted into some other higher than that.
Right.
So yeah, that's my source on this one. And he's, we used to work for him in the Phoenix office. And don't hold your breath, folks. I wish we did, but
Thanks for answering that question for us. So a year from now, I'll have to bring you back on, and we'll see how these, how many more houses have been built
Right.
since this SDC thing, and some of the other initiatives that you've worked on.
We're really trying to not think like city people. We don't, there are people who think that city people think like bureaucrats, and maybe there's some history to that. But we're trying to make our folks think in an innovative way. How do we help the community? How do we take a holistic approach? How do we drive growth to get this community, the economy, as healthy as we possibly can? And there's an old trope that people use, which is, if you're not growing, you're dying. So we really need to be thinking about, how do we stimulate growth in this community and make a healthier economy and more opportunities for our residents to be able to, get better jobs, better restaurants, better stores, whatever it is they're looking for, better quality of life. How do we get that? And once we need to stimulate the economy to get some of that additional capital investment.
So along those lines, and wrapping it up, you are in that world and you get to help influence those decisions. What is something, like one thing that the citizen could do to help?
You know what I think this comes down to? And I try not to touch politics, but I've done economic development and development work in 7 states and done consulting projects in 20. The state of Oregon and their overregulation, they like to think they're helpful. They like to think, we're trying to stimulate housing, and then they put 15 different levels of regulation and hurdles up for folks. If you're thinking about, how do we, as a community and as a state, promote more, responsible and reasonable growth, remove as many of the restrictions on local land use controls and development controls. At the moment, the state has almost a veto power over all kinds of projects, and they're well-meaning folks, but they're 300 miles away. The best decisions on development projects and growth comes at the local level. Where local elected leaders both can make the decision, but have to face the consequences of not doing and doing things. But at the moment, the state of Oregon, and you know what? When you get to Portland and places like that, they may not like growth. They may not want new development coming. That's fine. And they put regulations and restrictions, and their latest round was, allowing more density on lots. We've always been flexible about that. That's not our solution. The solutions they're talking about might work for them, but that's not our problem. That's not the problem we face here in Southern Oregon and the more rural areas of the state. So, how do it would be nice if there was, as an example, state income tax credits for home builders to build here versus building $1 million homes in Bend or Portland or wherever Hood River or wherever it happens to be. But we almost need to have a bifurcated development standards, development permitting, and regulatory process. And what works for the north part of the state in the Willamette Valley might be great for those guys, and good luck to them. But we need local flexibility and local control to be able to control our destiny a little bit better than those folks. I think the folks here in Klamath Falls know better about what they want and what they need versus somebody 300 miles away.
Absolutely. So it sounds like what you're saying to the people out there watching that aren't in your role is vote, speak up, maybe send in some thoughts on this stuff.
I didn't say that.
Tell your elected officials.
You know what? Become engaged.
Yes.
That's the thing.
Yes.
And know that, there's the other thing that gets me is people are saying, oh, it was related to Winco. And they're like, oh, the city's taking forever and they don't want. We were turning things around quickly.
Oh, yeah.
And then we were sending it back to their engineers in Idaho, and they'd sit on it for 90 days. And then people would be like, well, why is the city holding it up?
Right.
No, my guys turned it around in 3 days. So we kind of understand that what's out there on social media and the people who think they know probably don't.
Right.
And, when people would call us, and, hey, this is when we turned it, we've got the dates and when we turned things around, what we did and how we did it. And they're like, oh.
Is there anything that bothers you about Klamath Falls?
Oh my God. Actually, yeah. This week I'm dealing with this because, we don't have a weekend or 24-hour vet. You would think with half a dozen or a dozen vet, there's a lot of vets in town, but they're all 8 till 5 Monday through Friday. You'd think they'd be able to get together and figure out, to have a rotating thing for weekend vet service. You can charge a lot of money. People will pay more. You don't have to be open every weekend, but figure it out get together or get a half a dozen vet companies together or vet people together and take turns being open one weekend a month or 24 hours. Because, I've heard from a number of folks here in the community that their dog is coughing up blood at 10 at night. They're driving over the hill into Medford for the emergency in snow and things like that. You ask me one thing that bothers me. That's a thing that troubles me. In fact, I'm driving my cat over to Medford for a clinic today because you couldn't get in. And that's one thing. It's not like we're short of vets. We've got plenty of them.
Mm-hmm.
It's just they can't seem to figure out how to get together. Sorry, guys. It's just you. She caught me on a hot button issue. Wow, I wasn't anticipating talking about this today.
That's a collaboration that should happen. Come together.
You'd think it would be relatively easy for 3 or 4 vets to get together to arrange being open on a weekend. Or having some vet on call 24. Even if it was one individual, get half a dozen individual veterinary doctors to work out of one specific clinic on a weekend or being available 24 hours. How about that?
That's a good idea. So I have 3 fun questions at the end. These
Didn't
are
do
for
it.
you.
Okay.
If I gave you $250,000 to do something with by the end of the day to make a difference in the community, what would you do with it?
Oh my God. I don't know. That's a tough one. I'd make sure that every kid in town knew where their next meal was coming from. That's something I'm very passionate about. The fact that we're one of the richest country, that we are the richest country in the world, and 20% of our kids are food insecure. And I think it has to start with the local level. I would, if it was a larger amount of money, I'd figure out a way to get working and middle class and working class folks not paying as much in taxes bear in mind, I paid more in taxes last year than billionaires. And when they pay 0, that's not right.
Right.
So,
Yes, sure.
Sorry.
Yep. All right. So you'd feed people. Tell me about one of your role models.
Oh my goodness. Role models. I had a boss once. His name's Don Mudd. Don played football at SMU, was actually the roommate in college of Hacksaw Jim Duggan, of all things, And Don was one of the smartest real estate development guys I've learned from. And after I'd got all my licensing and broker's license and everything like that. And Don took me aside and said, forget everything they've taught you. I'm going to teach you how to do it the real way. And forget what the books say. Here's how we do it in the real world. And it taught me to think differently than the typical person that follows the rule book to the letter. Here's how you become more effective, and here's how you know which rules to pay attention to and which ones, that's extraneous. You don't need to do that. And his words to me were, your job is to be working and to come back to me and go, is this a rabbit? And you go, no, that's a raccoon, throw it away. And then you come back to me and go, is this a rabbit? No, that's a rat, throw it away. And you'll eventually come to me and goes, this is a rabbit. You go, yeah, that's a rabbit. This is what we're going to do with it. This is how we're going to structure this deal. This is how we're going to work this project. Right. And he thought differently than everybody else. He was crazy, but one of the sharpest development industry minds that I've come across.
Sounds like an interesting guy.
He really was.
I bet he had cool stories.
You don't even want to know some of that. Like, I've been described, by the way, as Forrest Gump of the development world, because I've been a lot of places and done a lot, and I've just seen some random things. And somebody will ask me, and I'm like, oh my God, you'll know, and they'll be like, that's not true. And I'll pull my phone and go, yeah, here's where we did it, and here's the pictures, and they're like, oh my God, it's true.
That's funny. Now I'm going to call you Forrest at some point in time. Last thing, if you could describe your perfect day in Klamath Falls, if you were arranging the perfect day in Klamath Falls.
I don't want to say I don't want to be like funny and go April 16th because it's not too hot.
You know what? Every time I ask that question, I'm waiting for someone to answer that way. But no, I'm talking about what would you do in a day? If you had family in town and they were like, show us what makes Klamath County, where would you take people?
All right. So it starts late because I'm not really a morning person. I don't laugh. I always go to the gym it's a Saturday. Usually my favorite day is a Saturday. So so you got freedom. You don't have to go to work. I start out with the gym. If the weather's nice, Moore Park's always great. I like taking people downtown. Just kind of like, it's a little bit different. It's not the same as everywhere else. I like the Falls Tap House and just kind of hang out there, especially when you go on top of on the roof there, and you can kind of see the whole valley there, and the food's pretty good. I like food trucks. I'm a sucker for a good food truck. I'm not going to tell you which ones because then everybody's going to go there. But
I really want to ask you what your favorite food truck is, though.
Oh, Tacos El Fuego.
Okay.
Yep. It's great, and the pork street tacos are amazing. But yeah, that would be what I do, and then wings at the Pikey late.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for your time today,
hey,
Iain.
My pleasure.
Thanks for sharing all the information with us, and thanks to our producer, 40 Deuce Films.